The British are coming! The British are coming!
The story of my life.
In 1960, the radio waves were dominated by doo-wop and rock and roll. And then something happened that pretty much shook the entire music industry. Probably the biggest scandal in music industry history. They called it the Payola Scandal. And it resulted in almost every DJ in America getting taken off the air and blacklisted, including a guy by the name of Alan Freed, who literally invented the phrase rock and roll. Bottom line here, just in summary, these DJs were getting kickbacks from the music companies to play specific songs on the radio. And that was no good. So with the DJs across America having been flushed, the radio stations started playing this very safe, sanitized, middle-of-the-road music. Artists like Perry Como,
catch a falling star and put it in your pocket now.
Connie Francis, bands like the Shirelles, and the Five Satin. Now, I'm not going to say that songs like Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow and Smoke Gets in Your Eyes were bad songs. They weren't. They just didn't have any of that edge that rock and roll had. Now, part of that was contributed to by the fact that in 1959, we lost 3 really great rock and roll artists. Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper, on what came to be known as the day the music died. They were all lost in a plane crash, and Buddy Holly specifically was very much an innovator in rock and roll music. But the radio stations wanted to play it safe. They wanted to play music that kind of didn't offend anybody or didn't, offend anybody's sensibilities. So they were playing all those bands and all those artists that I mentioned earlier. And the young people of America weren't having it. By 1964, they'd really kind of gotten sick of it. They wanted something like what they started to have in the early 60s. They wanted something with a little edge, something that was projecting their voice through the music. And then in February of 1964, the British invaded America again. Their lead troops were 4 young guys from Liverpool, England. You might have heard of them. They called themselves the Beatles.
There are rumors around that this is Britain's revenge for the Boston Tea Party. 3,000 screaming teenagers are at New York's Kennedy Airport to greet, you guessed it, the Beatles.
And when they came to America, they ended up on the Ed Sullivan Show, and it was, at the time, the single most watched television program in history. 73 million viewers tuned in to see Paul, George, John, and Ringo perform I Wanna Hold Your Hand.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something.
And that was it. I Want to Hold Your Hand rocketed to #1 on the Billboard Top 100, and there was no looking back. The next band that came along was a band called The Animals. And really nobody had heard of them on these shores. But they took a song that started out like this.
There is a house in New Orleans you call the rising sun.
And turned it into this.
There is a house in New Orleans.
Yeah. I'm kind of thinking that second version was a little more popular. Well, then it was the Rolling Stones. And their first song out was a moderate hit. But then they came with I Can't Get No Satisfaction. And that was the end of that. That is the band that really kind of challenged the Beatles in terms of popularity. There were other bands that continued to come, and the British invasion kind of lasted from 1964 to 1967, but the influences are still in place today. Bruno Mars, in 2014, put out Uptown Funk, and he specifically has said that that was deeply influenced by the music that was coming out of the British invasion.
Girls hit you hallelujah. Girls hit you hallelujah. Girls hit you hallelujah. 'Cause Uptown Funk don't give it to you.
And that was in 2014. Some 60 years later, yeah, this was potentially, arguably, the most influential period of music in history. Some of the other bands that came out of that era, the Kinks.
You really got me going.
Herman's Hermits.
There's a kind of hush all over the world.
And another band that kind of started to challenge the Beatles and the Rolling Stones in terms of popularity, The Who. Yeah, there were a lot of classic bands and a lot of classic music that came out of that era. And I encourage all of you to look it up. There are some songs that, if you listen to today, 2025, you will be able to see how it influenced the music that's being put out today. But that music didn't just change the music industry, it changed everything. Fashion changed. People started wearing their hair long. It was a driving force behind psychedelia and the Summer of Love, Woodstock. Bands like Led Zeppelin came along later on in the 70s. But none of this would have been possible without those four lads from Liverpool. Tell me what your favorite song from the British invasion is. Tell me who your favorite band is. Drop them in the comments below. Until next time, I'm just here telling you the story of my life.
The story of my life.